Just days ago, an Alberta court locked 301,000 separation petition signatures in a secure facility. The referendum that was supposed to reach the October ballot just hit its biggest legal wall yet. Stay Free Alberta says it will appeal. The Alberta government says it will appeal the court ruling. And the question of whether Alberta's independence push survives the legal challenge brought by Alberta First Nations is now one of the most consequential constitutional questions Canada has faced in a generation. But to understand why this moment matters, you have to go back to January. Because while Donald Trump was applying tariffs on Canadian steel, aluminum, and automotive products from the outside, something else was happening that received far less attention. United States State Department officials were holding meetings with Alberta Separatist leaders. The Alberta Prosperity Project, the group pushing for a referendum on whether Alberta should leave Canada, was seeking another meeting with American officials with a specific request on the agenda: a $500 billion credit line from Washington to support Alberta if a future independence referendum were to succeed. The United States Treasury Secretary, when asked about the separation effort, did not express neutrality or concern. He said, "People are talking. People want sovereignty. They want what the United States has got." Let that land for a moment. While the United States government was publicly demanding Canada align its trade policy with American interests, its officials were privately meeting with a group whose explicit goal is to break Canada apart, not as a diplomatic courtesy, as an active engagement with a movement that would, if successful, eliminate Canada as a unified economic and political entity. Carney's response when the meetings became public was immediate and unambiguous. He said he expected the United States administration to respect Canadian sovereignty, and then he did something far more consequential than issuing a diplomatic statement. He flew to Calgary and signed the most significant federal-provincial agreement in a generation with the premier of the province whose voters are most drawn to the separatist argument. This is the story of how Washington tried to break Canada from the inside and how Carney stopped it.
It's a great day for Alberta. It's a great day for Canada. This is Canada and Alberta working together. Brighter future for those apprentices in the other room. Those, I hope if you're watching this, who are thinking about going in the trades, thinking about becoming engineers, thinking of working, building this great country, this great province, now is the time to sign up, because we are going to build this country strong. We're building it strong for all.
Now is the time to sign up. That line was delivered inside a union hall in Calgary to apprentice tradespeople, and it is the most politically precise thing Carney has said about Alberta separatism without ever directly mentioning it. Because the separatist movement in Alberta is not primarily driven by constitutional philosophy or a deep ideological commitment to independence as a political end in itself. It is driven by frustration, by a feeling, widespread and genuine among Albertans across the political spectrum, that the Federation has not delivered for their province, that Alberta's energy wealth has been taxed, regulated, and pipeline blocked by federal governments that did not understand or respect what Alberta contributes to the country. That frustration became the raw material that separatist organizers converted into 301,000 signatures on a petition. And it became the opening that American officials tried to exploit when they met with Alberta Prosperity Project leaders and signaled potential financial support for a successful independence vote. Carney's answer to that frustration is not a constitutional argument about why Canada is better than independence. It is a pipeline, a carbon market, 50,000 careers, methane reduction, a federal government that flew to Calgary, sat down with a premier who had been openly hostile to Ottawa for years, and produced a concrete agreement that delivers tangible benefits to Albertans on a specific timeline.
You cannot counter frustration with arguments. You counter it with results. And Calgary was results.
When I get into the office, I always look at this statue
on my desk. It was given to me by Mike Myers just over a year ago. And this is General Isaac Brock. Brock was a hero who fought and gave his life for our forebears in the War of 1812. Before Canada even existed on paper, it had a shape in Brock's imagination. Faced with the threat of an American invasion, Brock built alliances across our land and inspired what would eventually become Canada.
Faced with the threat of an American invasion, Brock built alliances. Carney keeps that statue on his desk for a reason, and the reason has never been more visible than in the context of what Washington attempted with Alberta's separatist movement. Because the historical parallel is not subtle. In 1812, the threat to Canadian unity came from American military pressure from the outside, combined with internal divisions that American strategists hoped to exploit. Brock's response was not to fight the internal divisions with force or argument. It was to build alliances, to find common ground with the communities that had grievances, French settlers, Indigenous nations, British loyalists, and unite them around a shared purpose that delivered concrete benefits to each. 200 years later, the threat to Canadian unity is coming from American economic pressure from the outside, combined with regional frustrations that American officials have explicitly attempted to exploit. The Treasury Secretary's comment that people want what the United States has got was not an offhand remark. It was a signal that Washington sees Alberta's frustration as a lever it can use to pressure the Canadian Federation at a moment when tariff pressure alone has not produced the concessions Washington was seeking. Carney read that signal the same way Brock read the American invasion threat, not as a crisis to manage defensively, as an opportunity to build an alliance that makes the threat moot. The Calgary Agreement with Smith is the 21st century equivalent of Brock's coalition. Different communities, different grievances, same essential strategy. Unite around concrete shared interests, and the external threat loses the internal division it was counting on.
I was born in Fort Smith, just north of the Alberta border. When I was born, the oil sands were a concept, a curiosity to most, a dream to but a few builders. By the time I was in junior high in Edmonton, the oil sands had been transformed already by that point to one of Canada's largest industries. And it happened because of the brilliance of our scientists, the drive of our entrepreneurs, yes, the support of provincial and federal governments, and the dedication of our skilled workers. And that's the legacy that we're building on today.
I was born in Fort Smith, just north of the Alberta border. That personal detail is not incidental in a speech about Alberta separatism. It is the most important sentence Carney delivered in Calgary, and it deserves more attention than it received.
Because the separatist argument in Alberta depends on a very specific narrative about Ottawa. A narrative that says federal governments are run by central Canadian elites who do not understand Alberta, do not respect Alberta's economy, and make decisions about Alberta's resources from a position of cultural and geographic distance.
Carney standing in Calgary and saying he was born near the Alberta border, that he went to junior high in Edmonton, that he watched the oil sands transform from a concept into one of Canada's largest industries during his own lifetime, is a direct challenge to that narrative. Not an argument against it, a lived counterexample. Smith told reporters that she had spoken with Carney about Brexit, that she did not want to see a repeat of a situation where legitimate political frustration was not taken seriously by political leaders until it was too late to address it constructively. That message coming from the Premier of Alberta, who has spent years articulating Albertan grievances more forcefully than any provincial leader in a generation, is the most powerful possible testimony that Carney is listening in a way that previous federal leaders did not. When Smith stands next to Carney and says she does not want Alberta to leave Canada, that she wants to demonstrate that cooperative federalism works, the separatist argument loses its most important implicit endorsement. The Premier of Alberta is not its champion. She is actively arguing against it while standing alongside the Prime Minister, who just delivered a pipeline deal. Washington's investment in Alberta separatism just lost its most important potential ally.
In terms of any referendum, we're a democracy. We have standards and an ability for provinces to hold referenda on a variety of subjects. And if following the rules, they hold referendums. Obviously, we support that. That means respecting the rights of Indigenous peoples, respecting the rights of people to privacy. It means if it's a referendum on separation in any province, it has to be consistent with the Clarity Act. Ultimately, Parliament has a role in making the judgment about the question.
Parliament has a role in making the judgment about the question. That sentence is the legal architecture Carney is deploying against the separatist movement, alongside the political architecture of the Calgary Agreement. Because the Clarity Act, passed in the aftermath of the 1995 Quebec referendum, gives the federal parliament a specific and significant role in any future separation process. Parliament must determine whether the referendum question is sufficiently clear. Parliament must determine whether the result represents a sufficiently clear majority. And those determinations are made after the vote, not before. Which means a simple majority on an ambiguous question does not automatically trigger separation negotiations. Carney's invocation of the Clarity Act is not a threat. It is a statement of legal reality, and it is accompanied by a very significant development that happened within days of the Calgary Agreement. An Alberta court ruled that the separation petition's signatures were invalid, locking 301,000 signatures in a secure Elections Alberta facility pending appeal. The legal, political, and economic architecture Carney has built around Alberta separatism is now remarkably comprehensive. Legally, the Clarity Act and Indigenous treaty rights create significant barriers to any separation process that does not command an overwhelming and unambiguous majority. Politically, the Calgary Agreement with Smith has deprived the movement of its most important potential ally and given frustrated Albertans a concrete federal response to their economic grievances. And economically, a pipeline to Asian markets carrying 1 million barrels per day gives Alberta producers something they have wanted for decades without needing to leave Canada to get it. Washington offered Alberta separatists a $500 billion credit line. Carney offered a pipeline, 50,000 careers, and a premier standing beside him saying cooperative federalism works. The contest was not close.
You know, those whose politics is to destroy, to demolish, dismantle, they're not going to change their instincts. This is, in many respects, this is their moment. We can't match them by being timid imitations of them. We can't answer them by pining for an old order that's not going to return. Through the crack in the bell, as Leonard Cohen said, through the rupture that the light gets in.
Through the crack in the bell, that is where the light gets in. Alberta's frustration with Ottawa was a crack, a genuine one. Built over decades of equalization disputes, pipeline cancellations, carbon pricing conflicts, and a persistent sense that the Federation was not delivering for the province that contributes so disproportionately to it. Washington saw that crack and tried to widen it. State Department meetings with separatist leaders, a Treasury Secretary signaling sympathy for the independence cause, a reported $500 billion credit line offer dangled in front of a movement that was still deciding whether it had enough popular support to sustain a referendum campaign. What Carney understood, and what the Calgary Agreement demonstrates, is that the answer to a crack is not to pretend it does not exist or to argue that it should not matter. The answer is to let the light in, to take the frustration seriously, to deliver the pipeline that was blocked for years, to sign the carbon market agreement that Alberta's industry needed, to stand in a Calgary union hall and tell apprentice tradespeople that the federal government is going to help build something big enough to matter. The separatist petition now faces a court appeal. The signatures are locked in a secure facility. The premier, who might have been the movement's most powerful potential ally, is standing alongside Carney, saying she wants to demonstrate that cooperative federalism works. And the American officials who thought Alberta's frustration was a lever they could use against Canadian unity are now watching a federal and provincial government that 6 months ago could barely agree on anything sign the most consequential energy agreement in a generation together. Washington tried to break Canada from the inside. Carney answered with a pipeline, a carbon deal, and a trip to Calgary. The crack in the bell let the light in after all. Stay with this channel for analysis that goes this deep on every story that matters.